with Professor Chris Brooks, Professor Josh Pasek, Professor Rebecca Quintana, and my colleague Sarah Dysart will facilitate this panel on some of the great work we've been doing in GenAI short courses. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I realize we are the only session holding you between lunch, so we will hopefully have a delightful conversation this morning. So I'm Sarah Dysart. I lead the work happening related to developing the online portfolio in the Center for Academic Innovation. And in that work, we develop non-credit and for-credit online learning initiatives with faculty collaborators throughout the university. So this morning, I have the distinct pleasure to introduce you to several of those faculty members. Before we do that, I want to give you a little bit of a context. So last fall, we issued a call for proposals for new learning opportunities that would essentially be addressing aimed at preparing learners for success in an era of AI in the workplace. So really focusing on short, distinct learning opportunities for learners to engage and learn skills that would help them in their work. We elicited proposals for 45 unique courses from 25 faculty across the university, and 3 of those faculty are up here this morning. So Dr. Chris Brooks from the U of M School of Information proposed a Llama for Python Programmers course, which launched in March. Dr. Josh Pasek from the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts proposed a series titled Navigating Disruption, Generative AI in the Workplace, which is set to launch in November. And Dr. Rebecca Quintana from the Marsal School of Education partnered with Dr. Chris Quintana, who's also here today, to propose a series titled Generative AI as a Learning Design Partner, and that launched in August. So you'll have a chance in a moment to hear from them about their motivations, unique insights, and perspectives on developing these opportunities. So let's dive in. So I'm hoping that each of you can give a little bit of an overview of your learning experience that you created and the learner audience that you were hoping to address with proposing these opportunities. So Josh, do you want to take?
So my course, Navigating Disruption AI in the Workplace, or Generative AI in the Workplace, is really sort of designed to be sort of a modal introduction for what do people need to know to be able to engage with this stuff as either workers or as somebody in leadership in a particular workplace. And the thought is essentially, well, you need to kind of know how the technology works on a basic, but a little more than very surfacey level, to get a sense of what kinds of responses it's going to give and where it could go wrong. You need to have a sense of what kinds of things it's likely to impact and where it's not. So thinking about sort of some of the tasks in different areas that it's likely to change. And then you need to think more broadly, really in whatever position you're in, about what the net effects of that are going to be on a workplace writ large or on the way that different actors engage with each other. And finally, you need to be aware of sort of the different stumbling blocks and hurdles that you can hit along the way, right? So the design of the course is really built around that. So it's a 4 mini course series that basically says, what is generative AI and how does it compare to disruptive technologies in the past for the first course? How is it likely to influence jobs in different industries, and how do we sort of take apart jobs and figure out what tasks it will and won't matter for? The third course is really focusing on sort of what's the net effect of this going to be for workplaces writ large, for how workplaces interact with their employees, for how they interact with potential clients, and how do those get navigated in a world where these kinds of disruptions are occurring. And then finally, how do you think through all the messy issues around AI that are liable to influence most workplaces, like copyright and hallucinations and bias and stuff of that sort.
So I'm a computer scientist by background. My course on Llama was focused at programmers. How do you start leveraging these large language models, especially the open weights or open source large language models? And that includes everything from what's the license? What does it mean to be an open weight model? How do you actually bring this down and run this on a piece of hardware that doesn't cost $50,000? to run it on, what's it capable of, and how do you get those first prompts in there at a computational level and start getting tokens out and understand them. So a lot of it is on this foundations for programmers to understand how to interact with those models. There aren't equations. We don't go into the attention mechanism, for instance, if you're a deep learning person. So it's not like a deep data science or machine learning program, but really it's a short course that focuses on connecting that to code so that you can build interesting and novel GenAI experiences. That course launched in the spring, I think March or something like that. But actually, it's also been integrated into my credentialed course in our master's program, which is called something like Building Generative AI Applications, that ends next week. So it was the first week of a 4-week 1-credit unit class that then used that as the foundation and then started building on top of it.
Great. So the course that Professor Quintana and I developed, actually a series of courses, is on the topic of learning experience design. And so the course series is really geared toward learning professionals, folks who have experience in the field, who have authentic work contexts, and are grappling with questions very similar to what our previous panel just discussed, which is how do we make sense of the introduction of generative AI in the workforce, in our workplaces, and how can we be strategic about its use? So our 3-course series consists of courses that are fairly short compared to our previous series, which was a more comprehensive introduction to learning experience design. But our Leveraging Generative AI as a Learning Design Partner series consists of 3 courses that are about 5 hours each. So they're really sort of targeted and focused in particular ways. So the first course looks at sort of the design process more broadly and considers from a holistic perspective where within the learning design process does it make sense to consider integrating generative AI as a tool. So we're really relying on the fact that our learners have some experience in this area. If they don't, we do point them to our original series because we feel it's important that although, emerging learning professionals can certainly benefit, we do feel it's important that folks have some grounding in the field before really diving in a deep way. The second course looks at specific learning design tasks. So again, along the lines of what we just heard in our panel, thinking about brainstorming, drafting, techniques, as well as sort of reviewing and evaluating a completed learning experience. And then thirdly, we, again, take sort of a step back and consider from a leadership perspective, a strategic perspective, those who might be directing learning design teams, for example. How do they consider when and how to introduce these tools to their teams? And how do they sort of within conversations that they may be having with other stakeholders, advocate or raise significant concerns and questions. So again, a little bit more of a strategic approach from a compliance and policy perspective.
Excellent, thank you. So we were really excited about this call because we felt like there was a really great need for learners to be able to engage in different learning opportunities. I'm curious to hear what motivation you each had for proposing your initiative and what was really exciting about this call. So Rebecca, do you want to start us off?
Yes, sure. So we had just completed our regular length 3-course Learning Experience Design series, an introduction to learning experience design in January of 2024. And so we were very excited to have that launch. That was a longer term effort and is essentially an online version of our Learning Experience Design Certificate. And I see some of our students here today who are part of the residential program here at the University of Michigan. But we wanted to expand that program to an online global audience of learners who are also interested in upskilling within the field of learning design. But when this proposal came forward, we were excited because we had wanted to do something around generative AI in our original series, but there just wasn't time. We hadn't really planned for it in that way. So we're really excited to be able to add a complementary series that could sort of add on, build on to our foundational series, and do it in this sort of shorter format that's really sort of focused and targeted. And in terms of the timing, we thought, this is great. We have an opportunity to say something early on in the conversation. This was sort of a time where a lot of discussion was happening, just as it is now, but we just thought from a timing perspective it was ideal, so we were really excited to do it.
Chris.
Yeah, so I've designed a number of MOOCs and delivered a number of MOOCs since I think 2015 or 16. And the special part of this call, which is really important and really tied to the domain, is short course, right? That the idea was that we were breaking things down into even smaller little chunks. And I'll be honest, GenAI stuff is changing very quickly. And I think it's changing across the stack. So while the technology underneath is changing, for instance, in this course, which again, just in March was made available, taught Llama 2, now Llama 3, 3.1, and 3.2 have come out. And so this is rapid. This is faster than I've ever seen new packages, new technologies, new techniques come out. But I think it's changing across the stack. We still talk about hallucinations, but it's different now. The models now are way better than the original ones that got us excited. It's now hard, actually, to find good examples of hallucinations. And so just as a little bit of brutal honesty here, I was preparing a lecture where I wanted to show how chain of thought reasoning was important for the model. You give the model a difficult task that it's unable to do, but if you say, no, let's think step by step, it plans that out, fills the context window, and it's better. I gave it a task in probability, which models have been bad at, math tasks and stats tasks. This model solved it. I said, no, you're wrong, blah, 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 think step by step. So it went step by step and it said, no, I'm right. And so then I wrote some code to demonstrate that it was wrong. It was right. And I'm a tenured professor who teaches this for a living, right? So we have to be humble in the face of some pretty impressive technologies. That's not to say they're without fail, but across the stack, they're improving and they're changing so rapidly. And so in this class that I've just now complete next week, a week before it, a new technology came out and it didn't seem right to not put it in. So the beauty of this call was that I could write I'm going to spend 6 weeks doing this. I'm going to dive into it, I'm going to live it, and then I'm going to kind of deliver something, and it will enrich me even if the content doesn't stay evergreen. And that's what I really loved about it.
So I'm going to tell a circuitous story that actually begins at a very different spot in the university. So in 2022, when we had our chat GPT on the scene moment that kind of shifted how many of us talk about this, I was the social science associate director for the data science center on campus. And I realized that put me in kind of an interesting spot because the social sciences were not talking about AI in the data science context very much. There was a little bit, but not very much going on there. There were a few sort of basic AI models that were being used to code things, et cetera. But it became clear pretty quickly that there was this sort of radical gulf between what the data scientists and the real AI people on campus were talking about and what most of the rest of campus and nay, the world was sort of discussing with respect to this stuff. And that understanding in a serious way what the technology was doing under the hood was a critical component of being able to give normal people a sense of what could be expected out of the technology. And so I started in my role at Midas, which is that data science center, trying to bring people together to have more of a campus-wide conversation about it, and to sort of help have those conversations from what we knew on the data science AI and was sort of known in computer science and the School of Information to a bunch of the, social sciences and humanities that weren't really talking about this. That led last year to a course I taught that was AI and human communication, because my primary appointment's in a communication and media department. And when this call came out as I was doing that, I sort of realized, well, it would probably make sense to really pitch something in that space, because one of the things that's kind of challenging here is there's sort of the technical side and there's the non-technical side, but that if you don't give enough of the understanding of the technical side, it's really hard to come to a decent non-technical understanding of where things are going and where they are. And so my proposal very much was sort of around that, was saying, like, what we need to do is find a way to build that bridge that gives people just enough of the technical that they get what's happening under the hood, not, of course, the ability to build their own LLM or the like. That's your job, Chris. But the ability to really get that sense of, like, here's why it might give a wrong answer sometimes. Here's what's going on there, so that you understand that it may look like a human, it may look like a reasoning agent in a real serious sense, but the processes are different, the errors are going to be different, and how you interact with it is going to need to be attentive to that.
Chris, you spoke about how the specific learning experience type was really important to you in this, and I want to dive into that a little bit. So we were really focused on massive open online courses, so non-credit open online learning opportunities, shorter, more discrete opportunities for individuals to engage in a learning experience. What were some of the assumptions that you made about the learners who would be engaging in your course, what their needs would be, and their motivations for engaging? So Chris, can you start us off?
Right. Yeah. So that's, I think, great. So one thing to bring in is that my research area, my scholarly area, is learning analytics. So I actually study how people learn, and I use data science and data science models to do that. And so the very first thing I did was design data collection into the course. So the students are asked to introduce themselves, and then at the end of the course, they're also asked to reflect on what they've learned and whether they would use any of that. And the goal was actually to better understand who are the people who are coming to this course. At the same time, it was pretty narrowly scoped towards people who were programmers. That could be data scientists, it could be machine learning people, it could be just application developers, or someone who's like, yeah, I got a little bit of Python under my belt, I can do this. Any of that counted as a programmer, because I wanted to get under the hood, show the code, and have people leave with the ability to actually write a program that interfaces with the LLM. One of the challenges, though, that came up through all of this is that I wanted to teach the Llama set of models. And there's a couple of reasons why. So these were created by Meta, and there's a number of them that have been released, and they're continuing to release them. But they're open weight models, or open source models, Meta calls them, and there's some wiggle room in there. But it means that they're freely available, that you can take it, download it, and run it on your own premises, your own hardware, your own machine. And that actually has a number of interesting implications for us in the sphere of education, because if you can run it locally, then you don't have to worry that you've put FERPA data in it, because the data never leaves the institution, or other sensitive data in it. And I actually think that there's a huge need for that. And so that was one of the parts that I went for. Open source programmers, and that was kind of the main persona, if you will.
Josh, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I was trying to sort of hit the working masses to a much larger extent in the way that I was thinking of mine. Like, how do you prepare ordinary people to actually encounter this technology as it gets rolled out into workplaces? And thinking about that, and also thinking about how, and I mean, for me, there's also a functional question of, like, how does this get rolled out, and what are the implications as people who lead workplaces are thinking about this, and thinking about that dynamic of, like, how are workers and workplaces going to interact is kind of what I wanted to target here, so that I'm speaking both to potential employers who may be wanting to assign something like this to employees so that they understand the technology and also can find a meaningful working relationship around it was kind of my goal.
Just build off one piece here, because I know Rebecca has seen a similar trend. So Coursera's main target market, or the market that they tend to hit, is in this like 25 to 34 young person, if you will, market. And in my course, that's actually not the majority of the users. The majority of the learners are coming from the 35 to 45 market. And like it seems obvious to many of us, but not everybody, that the future of work is going to change and that work is going to change. And learners are coming from that bucket of retraining, upskilling, or cross-skilling and building those competencies.
Thank you. Rebecca.
Yeah, just like Chris said, I actually checked into the analytics last night when you mentioned that our course too is trending in the 35 to 44 age bracket, which is not typical on the Coursera platform. So that's really interesting. I think in terms of learner audience, I like to use the term learning professionals to sort of encompass a broad range of folks who are doing this work, and that probably would be many of us, almost all of us in this room, but specifically instructional designers, learning experience designers, and as I said before, leaders, directors, and so on, who are making decisions, setting policy, allocating resources. Those are the target audiences for our course. In terms of what Chris also just mentioned about research, we also had some questions about sort of the sentiment of our learners within the series, and we asked very specific questions within our pre- and post-course survey around concerns that folks have, as well as the possibilities and potential that they might identify. So we asked the same pre and post questions across all three courses, so it might be interesting to see how that changes as they progress through the series. And also we asked them, our learners, to identify promising use cases. So as the technologies change, and we can fully expect that it will be interesting to see how those answers change over time as well throughout the series. In terms of assumptions, I mentioned this before, we really were targeting learning professionals with some experience in the field because we feel it's important for those foundational skills to be really developed and honed before introducing generative AI as a learning design partner. It's important for the learner to have some expertise to be able to distinguish between high quality output, to know how to put good quality input into the prompts. And so we did want to really encourage learners to have some foundation before engaging and diving deeply into the generative AI aspect.
Excellent, thank you. So how did you each see the characteristics of this type of learning experience, a short, open online course, really complementing the objectives to support AI skill building for workforce development? Josh, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge in the contemporary era with a bunch of this AI stuff is sort of how new it is to everybody and how many people it's going to influence. And in that environment, taking a longer, more involved course is potentially a real challenge to a lot of people that you would want to impact here, right? You want to find a circumstance where you can, get to people where they are without too much, so that they're at least at a point where they can be conversant in things. And yeah, we, obviously it's great if people want to keep going on and doing a bunch more in this space, but that challenge of sort of finding an ability to hit large groups of people who are in the middle of things, and yet this is coming down the pike anyway, seems particularly valuable in this arena. And so I think that the shortness is very nice there, and has some real advantages over a more traditional full-length MOOC.
Chris?
Yeah, one of the challenges in the online space is putting up draft content, things that need to change, because we've come to expect a polish from it, especially in Coursera videos, but it's not just that. It's in YouTube videos or even source code that people check into GitHub and the like. And that's something that we can often do residentially. We could be like, yeah, I'm going to run an independent study class and let's just see what happens. But in the online space, there's a time compression and so a quality expectation. By making it a short course, it allows us just to tackle a piece of it and to get literate in that ourselves, because also I don't work at OpenAI, right? Like, so 2 years ago, this was super impressive to me as well. And so we're figuring out the details of it and how to support learners. So short was incredibly important.
Yeah, we adopted a similar strategy where many of the assignments and activities in the series are really asking learners to develop a plan for how they would do something or to create a strategy for something, because we know that the technologies that they may use to implement their plan will change. So we wanted the assignments to be sort of long-lasting in that sense. But at the same time, we felt a responsibility to also demonstrate, practically speaking, what this could look like. So we did do some sort of hands-on screencasts of, writing the learning objective, for example, using generative AI and using that iterative process to improve upon the final outcome. So we did find ourselves doing a bit of both, sort of the big picture thinking, big ideas, having learners sort of consider broadly what the potential might be, hopefully providing some inspiring examples like role-playing using generative AI, but at the same time providing some specific details on how this can be accomplished. We did this through a series of videos as well as readings, knowing that we can probably more easily update the textual components. But at the same time, we recognize, eventually we may need to update over time so that the course still remains current.
We're diving into our next set of questions. So the pace at which this technology is changing is so rapid that even if you're an experienced online instructor or MOOC creator, you're having to think a little bit differently about how you're approaching this. So how did developing this initiative compare to other experiences, either teaching online or residentially? And did you have to think differently about how you approach the content, your pedagogical strategies, or your identity as an instructor? Chris, do you want to?
Yeah, maybe I just want to tackle it right before that, which is proposing the course. So within the School of Information, even if we're doing a MOOC, we write up a proposal, say what we're doing, responding to a call. And I want to share some of the discussions that we had amongst members of the committee just on that proposal. And part of it is, will this technology be around? Will it even be relevant? And let's just think for a moment as educators who want to be teaching our students the newest stuff, the stuff that's changing the world. If we slow down what we're going to teach because there's uncertainty as to the shelf life, that's a huge problem. I mean, we're going to get left behind, and those institutions that don't do that are the ones who will move ahead. But I think it goes actually a lot deeper than that. It's so expensive in time to learn something new, to conceptualize it, integrate it with your field or your area, and then to deliver a great learning experience on it, that it gets expensive on time, money, course assistance, video resources, whatever the pieces that you're throwing at it. The benefit of being able to do this short was to be able to say, well, I'm going to hedge my bets. Llama is going to continue to exist and be interesting to somebody. And it turned out that Llama was, and it's continued to become open. But it could have also not. It could have atrophied and gone away. And so being short meant I was able to take some calculated risks. But I do think that there's a big conversation, or an important conversation anyway, about just how fast should we be trying to do things? Because I see a lot of individuals not trying to put on the brakes, but being very hesitant because of shelf life issues. And I think we should be the opposite. That's when we should get excited and find ways to incentivize exploration.
Rebecca.
Well, having just completed our learning experience design series, I can certainly reflect on the differences between sort of the longer form as well as the short form of the generative AI series. And one kind of interesting thing that came up was that as we were planning for the demonstrations that I mentioned, the sort of hands-on screencasts of using GenAI to support learning design, we had a series of design jams with our learning experience designer, Melissa McCurry, and we were sort of planning out what we would do, what we would talk about, and then basing our scripts on those design jams. But then as we went further in our development process, we realized that the AI output wasn't always the same. So, I mean, of course we knew that, but, you know, practically speaking, so when we would go to demonstrate it, we would get a completely different output, which made the script not match what the screen was showing. And so we learned very quickly that we had to record absolutely everything because we might use it in the future. So that was a very sort of unexpected thing that we had to learn in using this very cutting-edge technology. Another thing that we tried in this series was a behind-the-curtain feature. Because, of course, we use generative AI in the development and design of our series. And we thought it would be interesting for learners to see a little bit more about how we use the tools. So in Coursera, you can lock items. In other words, learners progress through the sequence, and then once they've done so, the item is unlocked for them. So the behind the curtain feature kind of revealed how we use generative AI to develop multiple choice assessments, for example, the course image that Melissa and our media designer Fredo worked on, as well as our marketing team. So we thought that would be interesting and kind of give a flavor for the learners of how we use generative AI. But also it kind of raises questions more broadly of, as instructors are starting to use these tools within their own teaching and learning contexts, how are they communicating that to their students and sort of revealing their use of the tools and opening up interesting conversations, hopefully, about that?
Yeah, so I am no stranger to the experience of expiring educational content. I'm in a communication media department primarily. When I first came in 2011, I was teaching a course on social media and politics. That course would be so ununderstandable to any of my undergraduates today, it'd be remarkable. None of them know who Howard Dean is or what the Arab Spring was. It's dead, right? And so this has been, you know, this is something you can kind of work around by doing stuff at a moment in a classroom context, of course. But if you're putting something online that has to sit there for a long period of time, you have to think about that differently. And that was where, for me, the real distinction came. So it wasn't the idea of content that might like not be the same not that long from now, but really the fact that like, oh, I'm like putting this thing up there and it might be there 7-8 years from now when the technology is completely different. I think the same strategy as Rebecca was talking about where one thing that we did was we sort of took the stuff that was most liable to change and made that readings, so we don't need to go re-record it, right? So you can update the new version of that and try to make that what you're focusing on. There are definitely cases where I make it really clear in the content that I'm using an early example of AI and the issues that it had, and just treat it as something that may be demonstrative of a particular feature, but is inherently dated in the nature of the class, right? So, you know, early AI, you know, thought that 2 pounds of, you know, or when asked which weighs more, 1 pound of bricks or 2 pounds of feathers, said they were equal, right? The reason that mistake existed is a fascinating, requires a fascinating understanding of how AI works under the hood. But it also is something you will never get today. You will not get that same error because they've figured out how to avoid this sort of really obvious, you know, tripping points. But talking about why that existed is still potentially substantive. And so it helps to sort of balance a little bit of the sort of, let's take the new content, put it on in stuff that's readings or linked out to, et cetera, and take the old, you know, the stuff that is going to be dated and talk about it already at the beginning as if it's dated. And that was at least the strategy I took.
I want to leave us a few minutes for questions from the audience, but before we do that, can you talk with me a little bit about how you're thinking about leveraging this experience to inform your teaching of generative AI concepts in the future. Josh, do you want to get us started?
There we go. Sorry, I've been turning it off every time. Maybe it's not the best strategy. So I'm also teaching an AI and human communication course at the moment. I've been sort of, carrying across various exercises that I've been playing with, and obviously some of the work that I did, back and forthing really with AI to help design the class, because I did a decent amount of that to help, take my basic outlines and expand them toward a full course. Is stuff that I've borrowed from heavily. I think I'm going to continue using that strategy in the classroom. I think it works really well. I'll see how well I do according to, your proposals in the learning course once I finally get to that. But the strategy of doing a bunch of that, I think, has been really effective for that class. I've actually had to change that class in ways that's made it, a bigger class, and so I've been stealing materials generally. I'm not sure there's too obvious a single thing, though, that is like, here's what I'm carrying across. It's, it's like whatever I've created is now sort of fair game for me in the future.
Chris, you mentioned that you're using your course as part of a basis for a residential course. Can you talk more about that or other ways that it's informing your teaching?
Yeah. Wow. So, there's a bunch, both on the teaching side and on the research side, actually. I think, there was the immediate opportunity for content reuse, which of course we all really like. This experience has really demonstrated how fast everything is changing. And I've been now starting to plan out some opportunities to tackle that question. The idea that the course is constantly changing, and GenAI is part of a solution as well as a problem in that case. When teaching about GenAI, how can we use GenAI to, for instance, instead of reshooting a video, how can we use a voice clone or a video clone to patch the video like we would a software patch? So I've been taking some of the software engineering continuous integration and improvement methods and comparing them with the education continuous improvement methods, and then thinking about the kind of technological solutions using GenAI in between that we can do so that when we teach these experiences that they're easy to update and then have that percolate through all of the different places we're putting them, whether it's Coursera or whether it's in my classroom or whether it's TikTok or YouTube or wherever these things are going. How can we make the creation of whatever the video asset is or the expensive asset, how can we make that somewhat automated and yet still robust and meaningful?
Rebecca.
We're sort of taking a side-by-side approach, if you will, with our introduction of generative AI in our residential version of the Learning Experience Design course. So as we're teaching concepts like developing learner personas, we're teaching our students how to do that, sort of in the traditional way, and then asking them also to use generative AI to develop a learner persona, and then comparing them side by side and critiquing sort of what are the differences, what are they seeing in terms of what the shortcomings might be or what the advantages might be. And similarly, our students are part of a residency program at the Center for Academic Innovation, so they're working alongside learning professionals like our design manager, Claire Brown, who helped also with our series. And they're seeing these learning professionals use GenAI in their work, so it's important that they sort of be aware that this is part of the professional way of doing things, and so they're kind of having the opportunity to observe that firsthand. I just want to add one more thing too, is that even though we may not be explicitly discussing GenAI in our class topics, it tends to come up. So for example, last week, we talked about universal design for learning and the importance of designing for learner variability, knowing that our learners have differences across multiple dimensions, and using the framework to design for multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. And one of our students mentioned, well, what is the possibility for using GenAI to help with the development of all of these additional and complementary resources that need to be created to really implement a full UDL approach. And I thought that was a really insightful comment, given how challenging it is to fully embody UDL in teaching and learning. So it's a great question. What is the role of GenAI to support the development of these types of resources that can then meet the needs of our learners?
I think we might have time for one last question for the panel. Rebecca and Chris, you started talking about how you're using this as part of your residential course. How does teaching this concept, and Rebecca speaking about being workforce ready for your students, how does the learning experience differ for the residential student population versus the global learners that you were designing for? Or is it that that experience is salient to both of them? So Chris, do you want to speak to that?
So what I'm seeing in students is actually what I'm seeing in a broader segment of society, which is surprising to me. So I'm used to students being like, oh yeah, that's new. I'm going to tackle that. That sounds cool. I'll adopt that. And then what I was seeing in broader segments of society is people like, yeah, I'm going to sit this trend out. I mean, there's no sitting this trend out. It's kind of like the internet. So yeah. However, I'm seeing students do that. I'm seeing them take the choice. They're like, yeah, you know, there's a lot of stuff to learn in data science. I'm going to learn all of these methods. It seems like the GenAI stuff is kind of the flashy stuff now. We'll come back to it when it's fully baked. And I really worry that that's a not great mindset when it comes to learning something that's very ambiguous but is very paradigm shifting. So the power of the short course resources is actually part of that power is that we have Michigan Online. So my course that I made that we put up on Coursera in March is available to anybody at Michigan to take without cost to them. And that's huge, that people can get some of those competencies if they want them, even in an uncredentialed space. As we bring it into a credentialed space, I expect the university will start seeing minors or pathways or certificates or full programs around AI and AI application. As we did with data science, 7 or 8 years ago when Midas was formed. And so this has been great to bring into that, but it showed me a lot more of the places of fragility in our thinking about how we develop content. I mean, that's done. We don't even call it content. They're learning experiences. How do we co-develop those with AI to be robust, meaningful, and evergreen?
Becca?
Well, certainly in the residential context, one can be a little bit more experimental just because of this difference in scale. You can try things out knowing that you might change it next year, that's okay. But as we talked, as Josh also mentioned, sort of the challenges of wanting to keep the online global content a little bit more sustainable, one tends to be a bit more restrained in how one teaches the content. But so the sort of experimental stuff can be done a little bit more residentially. But I would say the sort of overall development of critical perspectives, thinking about issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, all of those conversations I think are equally possible within the online, global online space as well as the residential space and equally important. So providing learners across all modalities the opportunity to really engage critically with these ideas is essential.
The one place I'll add that I see some interesting distinction, and of course my course has yet to launch in the online space, but is in a classroom setting when you're digging into tools and you're playing with them and you're trying to experiment with them, the ability to sort of build off each other's experiments relatively quickly is something that is a real benefit, and you can see quite quickly. With online learners, the sort of individuation of a lot of that learning means that they're going to have to develop that a little bit themselves, and you can encourage that to some degree, but they're not going to be working on exactly the same thing sort of collectively in the same way. And I think there's going to be an enormous extent to which, you know, a concept like prompt engineering is something that is fundamentally experimental. There are no solid future-proof guidelines to prompt engineering. There are some good ideas, there are some great principles, but there's not really more than that. And being able to sort of play with a variety of things at once and understand what's actually working is much more effective as a community level thing than it is as an individual level thing. And that is something that I think is an interesting and important distinction in this particular space going forward.
Are there questions from you for our panelists?
First of all, thank you very much for your panel discussion, and I'll give a round of applause for all the hard work you've done. You can raise your hand. I'll bring around a mic. Not yet. Yes, right here.
Hi, so as a student, I'm curious, how can I advertise my ability to use GenAI to get my work done to the potential employers?
I think we don't know yet is the quick answer there. I think, you know, the ability to use generative AI is valuable. The real tricky question is going to be how well you have learned to do the back work of checking on the quality of AI and being a good evaluator of it. And the fact that generative AI can aid the speed of work is great so long as the quality of that work is good. But the problem is a lot of stuff needs some level of human review. Being able to show that you're doing sort of that back end, you know, you can check it, you have the chops behind the scenes to evaluate what it's doing in a given domain is actually where a bunch of that value is going to get added. And I don't think we yet have a good way to communicate that, but I think that that'll be something that we're looking for as we go forward.
I was just going to add, it's a little bit like when our students are developing portfolios of their work and they're talking about work that's done in a collaborative setting, you know, how can they describe the contribution that they made within that context? It's a little bit similar when you think about generative AI as a partner in your work. You need to be able to effectively communicate to your future employers what your role was, what the role of the Gen AI was, and how you know, in a sense, how those two roles complement each other, how you iterated and improved. So I think it's really like a communication challenge more than anything, to be able to effectively convince your future employers that you had a role in that, and that the Gen AI was essentially a tool to support you in your work.
So I actually think you're in a very hard spot, which doesn't sound very reassuring. But the hard spot is that if you have an amazing portfolio that you put out in front of an interviewer, you risk the chance that they're like, they probably use ChatGPT to do this, right? And they dismiss the awesomeness of it. But of course, we all have access to ChatGPT, so there's no excuse for putting a poor portfolio out in front of somebody. So it comes down to this communication as an issue. And you should be thinking about it from the other side as well. The employer may not be thinking anything about generative AI and may be interviewing you just like they've interviewed for the past 20 years. And in that case, you should say, is this the right place? Like, what is this a forward-looking company? If they haven't integrated this into their interviewing standards, or if they've integrated it at a really questionable level, right? And so it's a hard place. Communication is the answer, but you should expect that there's going to be these bumps as you go through it. And part of it is because we don't have shared expectations around the use of generative AI. And we can bring this right into teaching. A lot of people still grade students based on effort, not learning outcomes, based on attendance, not learning outcomes. And while there's relationships between these things sometimes, and you can build a rubric that incorporates it, often it's effort that is being evaluated, and that puts you in a very hard place when you've got something that, like ChatGPT or other generative AI solutions that can help you on that effort side.
Questions? I had a question. Any interesting learners that have taken your courses that have launched, Chris or Rebecca, that you didn't expect, like an audience that you hadn't expected? Or you weren't an intended persona?
Well, I had a student stop me in the hall at the Marsal School of Education, actually. I think Pete, your student assistant, and I guess I hadn't really considered that the folks around here, we also have folks in this room who have approached me and said, I'm taking your course. So often you think, it's global, but it's also local. And so that's kind of an exciting thing to have people actually approach you and talk to you about it face to face.
Yeah, so Pete took my class. So Pete Beaudry's Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at the School of Kinesiology, and last I checked, not a programmer, but that's what my class was focused on. And so the interest in being able to see things from different lenses has been really strong. I get a lot of people who have some programming come in, but they might not call themselves programmers, but that's because they feel they need to know how this works one level deeper than they're getting from the prompt engineering course that they may have taken, or the GenAI for Managers course. And I'm not sure what to do with that. I'm not sure how to give the introduction to the inner workings that's meaningful for people who aren't actually going to be changing the inner workings or tweaking those yet.
Any other questions?
Well, we'll break for lunch here in a moment, but in addition to the Apple Vision Pro and the GenAI call for proposals, we have an online learning call. Do you want to?
We do. And I want to also mention, Chris, you gave a great plug earlier for Michigan Online. All of these experiences are or will be available on Michigan Online, online.umich.edu. If you're a student, faculty, staff, or alumni here, you have free access to those experiences. Josh's will be available November 4th, so if you're trying to avoid election-related coverage, might be a good thing to get your mind off of it. Refresh yourself with a learning experience instead. We do, if you are a faculty member here, we do have an open call for proposals currently, which is also inclusive of new AI-related experiences as well as broader workforce development experiences. So ai.umich.edu is the email address or the website address for the Center for Academic Innovation. We grabbed that one early in advance. I know that there's an AI lab out there that's really irritated that we have that name. But ai.umich.edu, and the call for proposals information is right there on the homepage. So,
Sarah, could I just add in, I've done many collaborative projects with people at CAI and CAI. So if you are faculty and you're thinking about this in any way, I really encourage you to reach out, talk. There's great mentoring as it comes up to putting together a proposal. Maybe it happens, maybe you don't end up putting it in, but you'll be enriched either way by putting that in, and it's time well spent.
I did not pay him. So thank you, everyone, and thank you to our panelists this morning.
Thank you, Sarah.